So a really nice set of books, actually, I guess, from Barenblatt go into that in really nice, in a full, deep way, and they worry about these sort of extra dimensions. But it's got some beautiful stuff about scaling in there. So it was the next one. Here's a pretty impressive back of the envelope calculation about a dire thing. This is the Trinity test in New Mexico, 1945. This was published on the front of Time magazine, as a declaration, I suppose. It was released. This information was released to sort of show that what the U.S. was capable of. And Taylor, who's an English fluid mechanics character, G.A. Taylor, just saw this and then figured out how much energy was in it, which seems absurd. But basically, they gave away all this top secret information by this picture. And what was in there was there's a scale here, so you can figure out the radius of the blast and time scales, right? This is the Empire State Building, so you can figure that out. So he has that on his envelope, right? He was able to jot down the size of the thing as it's growing. And he was, this guy's a genius, right? So he's able to sort of figure out that this is all he needs. He wants to get to energy. He thinks the density of air will matter, but there are other pieces here, right? I mean, you kind of worry about the ground maybe and so on, but this was enough. There are 4 variables, only and 3 dimensions. So again, we have the same as for the pendulum. There's only going to be one dimensionless parameter. It's a bit of an odd one. It ends up being like this, that the energy is going to be proportional to the radius to the power of 5, density of air is here, and then time squared. So you could figure it out. And this turned out to hold up and be, an accurate estimate. Right. The speed decays is 1 out of the 3 halves. So it's remarkable what you can get out from some, you need some deep knowledge about things potentially, right? You really do. But in this case, I suppose, we didn't, so for example, we needed to know about the buckling story, right? The d to the 4 over L squared for nails. There's really nothing like that here. This is just dimensions. So Radiolab, which I guess in my estimation is kind of a bit all over the place and has sort of gone downhill. They don't really talk about science anymore. But I think they took it off their little list of things they say they talk about. Okay. It's a bit like anthropology, right? Didn't they do that? They said they took science out of the... Anyway, it's disappointing. But this is a really, this is an impressive one. And if, enough people were around these things, I mean, from the actual, ones that were used in war, but also just radiation, that you have coding built into people and you can see, see things from, it puts these time markers into them. Okay, so this is pretty weird. This is just back to units. We're still sorting them out. I'm sorry this is hard to read. The idea is that we're going to actually change the way things are measured, right? So this is a pretty bizarre story. Again, it's Radiolab, but here it is. Up until, and I don't know if this has changed yet now, but the kilogram has just been a kilogram in France. Like there is a metal thing that is the kilogram, right? So if you really want to measure a kilogram, you have to make another thing that weighs just as much as that.
They did replace that.
So the problem was, right, that they cleaned it, and then it didn't match up with all the other ones that they made to copy it. So it was like a grain of sand difference. And, it's a disaster, right? So it's not derived from anything. So has it been replaced now? Because there are copies.
Yeah, I think they...
Well, the idea is to replace it completely, so it's not dependent on any actual artifact. And it was the only one. So you can see here, right? There is a kilogram, and then the rest of them are derived from all sorts of, Avogadro's number is just a number, I suppose. But things like speed of light, right? It's defined a cesium atom or something like that. Well, that was the second. That's the second, right? So, you can do these sorts of things that you can present to aliens or, yourself later on when you've forgotten what you've done and measure it because you're passed as an alien. Reproduce it, right? So there's some odd things. There's also some very weird stuff with saying, this is going to be Planck's constant. It's not going to go on forever. We're just going to stop it, and that's going to be better for measurement. It's really weird. It's really weird. But I found this absolutely amazing when this kind of erupted that, in the last 10 years. I actually saw someone give a talk about this, and I thought this is going to be boring as anything, right? Like, so it's just going to be talking about measuring stuff. I mean, measuring stuff is very important, but it's just going to be talking about units. It's like, this is going to be so geeky and weird. But then I'm like, oh no, like this is a disaster. Like, people don't have this sorted out. And you're like, come on. All right. Okay. Other kinds of scaling, right? So very famous ones in turbulence, Lewis Fry Richardson, who we'll come back to in various ways. Like to pull out these, so it's from Jonathan Swift's Big Fleas Have Little Fleas, right? Fractal concepts. Richardson has a number named after him in fluids. He's, did some pretty great stuff, at least thinking-wise there. And he had this idea that if you had enough people sitting down, writing out differential equations and messing around with them, you could, perhaps start to predict the weather. And he sort of thought about, people as computers. He had this idea of it. But he went off and did other things and looked at, say, the number of, dire things, like number of deaths. The death toll is a function for wars, right, ordered by size. So we'll kind of come back to some stuff that he looked at. So he had a whole treatise on what he called fatal quarrels, which seems a little odd for terminology for a war, but he was meaning everything from like a double homicide out to the First World War. Anyway, all right, efforts to understand everything. This is a funny piece. This is turbulence in Van Gogh paintings, right? The claim is that that there was turbulence sitting in things like Starry Night and so on, and you don't see it in anyone else's paintings. Not observed, or when Van Gogh was stable, right? So it's a special person in a special case. All right, funny things to do. This is weird. This is, again, one of these people like Taylor. It's Kolmogorov, who's a very famous character. Just figured out, again, a dimensional analysis piece that the energy in wavelengths in a turbulent situation has to decay like this k to the minus 5/3 or grow as the wave number. Decay as the wave number grows as the wavelength. And there have been advances since then, and it seems to hold up, but turbulence is a very hard thing to understand. Fluid mechanics, as we've talked about, a very successful field, but it gets very messy, of course, literally, but you can't use the equations in the same way. All right, that's a long time ago.